Welcome everyone to Salesforce Security Office Hours. Today's topic is going to be your Salesforce org has been breached. Do you have a ransomware recovery checklist ready? So first off, we're just going to get started off with what is Salesforce Security Office Hours and why it exists. Oops. So basically, Salesforce Security Office Hours existed because I started seeing that there was lots of breaches happening recently in the Salesforce ecosystem. I think it was just about timing because there's always been a lot of orgs that are misconfigured and there's holes that not because Salesforce itself is insecure but because customers are not aware of what they should be doing to configure their Salesforce environments correctly. So what I wanted to do was start up a forum so people will have a place to ask the questions to know what they should be doing to keep their org safe. And as part of that, what we're doing is introducing different topics by Salesforce security experts or have experts in that area that where you can get actionable insights that you can take away today and make changes today to help better secure your data in Salesforce. All right, so so the format of it is it's all open chat. So just like think of this like you're at a Dreamforce or at a dreaming event. Anytime you want to ask a question, just raise your hand or even speak up as long as I'm not already talking, and we're happy to answer your questions, and then we'll move on to further topics. All right, great. So next, one thing, just want to call it again. This is the slide you do not want to be on. Just a reminder, these are all the companies recently that have had a breach. Actually, this says Forcelandia here because I'm actually at Forcelandia conference right now talking about Salesforce security. So I just pulled the slide off of my other deck really quick. All right, so just rules of engagement for today. We'll kind of go through this every time, but just be respectful for others. It's open engagement, so like I said, you can ask questions at any time. Try to raise your hand, but also, I won't fault you if you just want to ask your question. Take notes. Make sure you take down takeaways so you can take away because the idea here is that you have something actionable you can take away today to secure your org. It's not just like a normal webinar where it's great to know some things, but nothing happens. The key here is you need to actually take action so you can make a change. All right. Who am I? My name is Matt Myers. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for over 18 years. I'm a Salesforce certified technical architect, ex-Salesforce, and author of this book here. I always like to show it, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences, which is a true story about a customer of mine when I was doing consulting that actually got hacked in Salesforce because they had misconfigured Salesforce and over 5,000 records got stolen. So I sell this book on Amazon. All proceeds go to nonprofits like helping Jessica from Africa come to Dreamforce and other things. So if you want to get a copy, you can go to Amazon. I'm also a founding member of the Low Code Security Alliance, basically trying to get more messaging out about things that you should be thinking about in Salesforce. I'll let Beach go ahead and introduce himself as he's our key speaker for today.
Hi, my name's Beach. I've been working with security for around 19 years now, both on the offensive side and the defensive side. So figuring out how to attack, figuring out how to defend, both digital and physical. And I'm in London, recently turned an architect.
Yep, so thank you for joining at such a late hour on your time as well. So, all right. One other thing, just like to always just call out. So, I am also the CEO and managing partner, co-founder of Easy Protect. What we do is we help protect customers' data in Salesforce by scanning for viruses and phishing attacks. We do fund and support this initiative. So, I just want to call out if you're not aware, Salesforce does not scan for viruses. If you'd like to know more information, get a free assessment. There's a QR code. So. All right, just a quick recap from last week. Last week, what we did was we talked about a better security vetting process for your App Exchange packages in Salesforce. The key is that most organizations don't have a really good formalized process for vetting Salesforce specific applications, whether it's a third-party vendor application like an App Exchange product or even internal packages. Basically, your IC security people, they understand all the security frameworks, but the problem is they don't understand Salesforce. But then you have the Salesforce teams that typically don't understand the security frameworks, but have a pretty good handle on Salesforce. And so really what we talked about in the last session was about how you could introduce a better framework working with your IT security, and even just, what you could implement to have a better way to truly vet vendors and packages coming into your org to make sure they're more secure, instead of just relying on ICT security teams that don't know Salesforce, that are asking all the wrong questions and not really securely vetting these vendors. If you want to watch that session, there's the QR code for that. All right, one other last thing before we're going to get started in the topic today, and I'll go ahead and answer that question. So Salesforce just a few days ago released some major security changes that are coming to connected apps. Specifically, they're going to start disabling the OAuth device flow, which is how the attackers were able to gain access to all these orgs. The device flow is basically where a browser pops up open, and basically it asks you for a code so that you could log in, and that's really how they got into that org, all those orgs. And so Salesforce is just completely getting rid of that. They're also adding a new permission that's a device restriction permission. So unless you're an admin user with a special permission, you won't be able to actually install or access any of these OAuth apps that have not been formally installed in your Salesforce environment, unless they've been whitelisted or they've been given that specific permission. So this is a really big change in the right direction, because now you won't have these normal users who aren't trained to look at these applications and know if they're safe or not to install them in the orgs. And this puts the power back in the admins to do that. I actually just had a talk with one of the product manager for DataLoader yesterday, and he said some other really interesting things are coming later in September as well that he can't announce yet. So we're going to try to get him on the show late September. So keep an eye out for that. All right, great. So on to the topic for today, but first let me go ahead and get back to that question that was asked. We can handle that first, and then we'll get on to the topic. So Amy, you're asking what you should watch out for security-wise in Experience Cloud for partners, because you're just trying to learn Community Cloud. That's a pretty loaded question. I should have looked at that earlier. I think that's a little bit longer than a 2-minute question, but I think I would say just really quickly, I can answer and then we can talk about it in the end. Really, I would just say in Experience Cloud, I don't think it's really different for partners, rather for anybody else. It's really thinking about how you can secure all your data. Because what happened, in my experience when my customer got hacked, was they had shared case records publicly with the guest user. And so really, and then that was able to be accessed via the Lightning APIs. And so what really this means is you need to ensure that your data is secured in your digital experience communities. Even if just because you can't see it doesn't mean someone can't get to it. So that's why it's really important in digital experience communities and all of Salesforce to restrict the data to only what people need to see. And so I was having a discussion when I was presenting yesterday at Forcelandia, when somebody was saying and basically talking about account data in their org, saying, well, we trust our users, so why should we restrict the account data in our org? Well, it's not really about your users, because the sad truth is one of your users will get breached someday. And the point is eliminating that or reducing the exposure of that breach. So if your users have access to all the account data, and then they get breached, that means the person who breached them has access to all your account data. But if your users only have access to a small subset of that account data, then that's all they get access to. And that's really what you want to be thinking about for your digital experience communities. So Becky, if you don't mind, I'm going to hold your question till the end so we can go and get on with the topic, but hopefully that answers your question, Amy. All right. All right, so on to the topic of the day. Your Salesforce org has been breached. Do you have a ransom recovery checklist? So just really quick, I like to do quotes or metrics. So then I'll give the floor over to Beach. Basically, the latest metric that we found here is saying that organizations that have a mature or high-level incident response planning and testing program in place, saw a cost savings of 1.49 million from data breaches. What that means is if you have a much more mature plan in place to how you handle a breach when it happens, these companies saw that they had 1.49 million of a reduced loss when a breach actually happened. And that's why it's important to not only be protecting your orgs as today, but also having a systemized plan in place on how you handle a breach when it actually happens. All right, I'll go ahead and hand the floor over to you, Beach, and then we can have a discussion afterwards.
Excellent. I was kind of hoping to go through the points together. We've got
Sure.
a set of threats, so that it's really nice to not have an incident to respond to, and then a set of cleanup options as in how to handle the response. So just looking at the threats, how things are coming in. So we've got things like a lot of companies have a lot of system admins running around, resetting passwords and things. So it's a matter of, can we have them as having less access? And there's also a lot of people concentrate on, say, the main Salesforce sysadmins. But then you've got MuleSoft with Anypoint, you've got Heroku AppLink, you've got Heroku Connect, you've got any DevOps deployments where people with elevated privileges can have their accounts compromised, and it's a much wider surface area.
Yep. And I think in one other call that we talked about the other day was Data Cloud as well. Is that, when you're a Data Cloud admin, you have access literally to all the data connections in that data space that are coming in at the first two layers of Data Cloud, right? So at your data lake object layer and your data source object layer, there are no real permissions, right? Because those are just data feeds coming in that data space. So if you have SAP data coming in, you have data from ServiceNow, Oracle, or other things, those admins have access to all that data. So if that admin gets breached, that's even a bigger scope of data that is exposed because that admin has access to everything.
And it may be a separate account, like they go in for their day-to-day into Salesforce, that's where they're operating. They've not even had a second thought about the other accounts that they set up and forgot about.
Yep, exactly.
And once they're in, let's say on Salesforce, they've then got privileges to lock out the other admins. So it's a matter of who do you call? How do you respond to that if every other admin has been locked out, other than the one that's been compromised?
True, true. And then also, of course, if someone gets compromised, someone could actually lock you out of the entire org. So once they've compromised one of your admins, then they lock all your admins out, and that's actually is a form of a ransomware attack because Salesforce can't even really get you back in to your org. I mean, if you've lost your credentials or you can't get in, they don't. I mean, I think they can, but it's very, very, very hard for them to get to that. So.
It's a matter of, what procedures do you have? Do you know how long that process takes? What's happening during the time that they've got the keys to the castle?
Yep, exactly. I mean, I think talking about another metric of like, okay, so imagine you're locked out of your Salesforce. You're using Salesforce for your sales, you're using for your case management, you're using for, maybe you're even using it for your public e-commerce site, and your entire org is locked out, and then they shut down your site, and now you can't sell anything. So just to give you an idea of just how much sites cost when they're down, like e-com sites, like Delta was down for 5 hours and cost them $110 million. So I don't know, if yours, but just imagine all these different things, or your customers are having a priority one issue and now you can't respond to them. You don't even know the ticket came in, and you're now you're in breach of your contract for your SLA with that customer. So I think there's a lot of downstream effects once if you can't get access to your org, even for several hours.
And I think one of the metrics you like quoting is 204 days to realize there's a breach. So
Yep.
if you're breached today, are they going to hold on until Black Friday to lock you out? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. Very true.
And keeping on that route of someone getting in innocuously, not being detected, the new crypto API that's been enabled, that allows you to put in, say, a hidden piece of code that's then a scheduled task that then kicks off a batch job to run over, say, the holiday periods to start encrypting your data. at a field
Interesting.
level.
I did not know about that. So that's a new API that is with Shield that's allowing you to actually encrypt data.
Not even Shield, that's available to everyone. There's a crypto API in Apex.
Interesting, because I've always known the crypto class you can do your own encryption, but this is now a different type of API that's just a complete separate API.
It's a complete separate API within Apex that you can do, like ASCBC.
Uh,
Store the key that you're encrypting, say in a custom setting. Start with the oldest data first to avoid detection. Queue it up for the 2 weeks of holiday time that most people have over the holiday season. Then just change the custom setting at the end of the batch job.
wow, that's interesting. So basically what we're saying here is this API here could allow someone to, if they set it up correctly, to then start silently encrypting all the data in somebody's org. But
And
of
they
course,
wouldn't
this would
even need
be,
Shield to have capability on that org to have done it.
yeah, got it. So this is an extension of a Shield capability, or is this an actual
This is a natural class in Apex that was
Hmm.
released, I can't remember, release ago or 2 releases ago, but it's now available for everyone in Apex.
I see.
Mostly for things
So you
like
don't
signing
need Shield
hashes.
for this. It's just basically allows you to encrypt anything, but specifically they could target the data using like you said, like a batch job. And then if they had admin access and compromise one of your admins, then they could load this up into your org, and then without you knowing, and silently and slowly starting to encrypt your data. And then by the time you know, it's too late.
Yeah. And they might do old data, say on the run up, and then do the last 2 years worth, because that's where most people have their kind of data, just during the
Yep.
holiday periods or some point a long
So,
weekend.
so I mean, and maybe you're getting to this, but what would you suggest people do to monitor something like this?
Even little things. So we've got daily alerts to let us know if there's been a change to a flow, a change to an Apex class as part of the backup. We then have insight to very restrictive to allow anyone to deploy. So everything has to have gone through the DevOps pipeline. But yeah, as I say, even little things like your daily backups, it should be backing up the config, and then you can just set alerts if there's a single flow change, a single permission set change, any of these that change. If the number of changes is more than 0, just alert it. So you
Yeah.
know, are things right, are things not?
So what you're saying is they don't actually need Shield for this. They
No?
could just have a backup provider that is allowing that can see what kind of changes are happening on the metadata layer, and then when it performs another backup, it sees a difference of maybe this new class that got deployed, and then you have this alert to let people know, hey, these are the changes, and then you see the change, and then you say, hey, this was not authorized, and then that way you could catch it before it does enough, too much damage.
Yeah, there's never normally a one-to-one relationship between, say, a threat and a piece of protection. So that would be the last barrier you'd want is an alert letting you know on a daily basis. But then you can start locking things down tighter and tighter, and eventually you're going to hit a problem where a disgruntled employee could attack. But that's why you have that last bastion, that email alert, just to let
Yep.
you know.
Yeah, because like what you're talking about here is actually deploying Apex, and luckily you can't deploy Apex directly or edit Apex directly in a prod org. You would need to
No,
issue a
have access to the
deployment using the
sandbox, and
metadata
yeah,
API, right? But
yeah,
somebody could, if they got admin access to your org, they could outside of your DevOps pipeline make that deployment to the metadata API. You're using Salesforce DX to deploy an Apex class or method batch job that you don't know. So I think then that's kind of what you're talking about, going back to that,
yeah.
looking at those batches, and then all of a sudden that would surface that this was this change that happened in your org. So I think a lot of people think of like the change management of understanding what changes go into your org, because looking at more from a DevOps change management perspective, not from a security perspective. Looking at, oh, okay, we're just want to understand when a change happened or if one of our developers did an unauthorized change. But I've not really ever heard anyone talk about using this monitoring like this to see when a not someone on your team, an unauthorized person, did a change to your org. And I think
It's
that's
it's like it's a last bastion, but there's several layers you could have done before that. It just becomes a kind of fail safe.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think we're talking about here, if someone gets admin access to your org, there's a lot of stuff they can do.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's really important to make sure that your admins themselves are locked down.
Yeah, but you've got that 204-day window, and what can you do to start chipping away at it if someone has been compromised and hasn't got a clue?
Yep. And for everyone here, we're talking about this metric that IBM put out that says it typically takes around 204 days, but that before a breach is detected. So it's actually is very true from the book I wrote in my customer. They had implemented Salesforce, and it actually been years, like several years they'd had Salesforce implemented, and they don't actually know how long it's been that that data was exposed. It was just that an ethical hacker reached out that they were able to get to that data. But then when they looked at logs, they know at least a year back that they had been in there. And so how do you stop all this? It's monitoring is where it goes down to, right, Beach? If
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
don't have monitoring in place, you're not looking, you've put all your controls in place, but you're not actually actively monitoring what's going on in your org. That's how someone can live in your org that you don't want to live there for 200 days or more.
And you'll never catch anything. You'll never catch everything. You'll never think it through. For instance, on the last point on that crypto API, if you create, say, a utility class, something that's more generic, that has dangers to be chained together more easily without requiring a deployment in
Mhm.
certain cases. So it's a matter of, even when you're starting to use things that have this danger, making sure even those utility classes aren't that open, that aren't that flexible.
Yep. Got it. That makes sense. So, and
And then
while
we've got the
we're talking here, I want to do a poll to people on the call here. And as far as I want to know, how many of you actually use Shield in your organization? And let's just keep
or any
talking.
point, any part of Shield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's see. Let's see. Go ahead while I'm creating this poll for
Yeah.
everyone.
So having a look at Shield itself and EKM on for Slack, you can do things like set a key, an encryption key for your data, and store it cashless. So it's only ever in RAM, only ever in memory in Salesforce or within Slack's infrastructure. And then you've got all your data encrypted. And then if you lose access to that key, or the key server goes down, that data is now you can't recover it. And with it cashless keys, and with EKM holding a key off-site, even Salesforce doesn't have a copy of that key. Once it goes poof out of RAM, they can't recover it from disk because it never touched disk. That key is your responsibility. If an attacker breaks into your Shield, changes over your key, how many people would even know that their key's been changed? You go in as part of ritual, you go and change it and things, but there aren't that many notifications by default because not many people are interested in the actual key. They just want to know it's encrypted.
Yep,
So if an
exactly.
attacker broke in, so go for it.
Yep. And I think this is another conversation we had a while back where I did a proof of concept to see if someone could, use Shield to perform a ransomware attack on you. And what I found out was specifically with the bring your own key, as you're talking about here, where if let's say you're using bring your own key in Salesforce and you encrypt all your data with that key, well, an attacker could upload a new key and then rotate the encryption using the new key, encrypt all your data, then they can delete that key from your Salesforce org. And now all your data is encrypted, but there's no key, and all your data turns into question marks. The difference with Salesforce being bring your key in, for example, AWS, is AWS has a cooling off period when you delete a key. So it stays around for a minimum of 7 days versus Salesforce, that key is immediately gone. So if someone gets access to your Shield, they could actually encrypt all your data, your key's gone, you don't even then you have no way to get your data back short of restoring from backup. And I think, or paying them for that key. So I think that's again where backup is critical to stop these kinds of attacks if they happen. And also, of course, making sure that your admin users don't get compromised, because that's one of the other things that people could do if they compromise your admins and you have Shield. It looks like we're about 50-50 for the people that have answered the responses that having Shield. There are different flavors of Shield, but I think the most common is encryption and event monitoring. So if you're having either of those, you should be watching out for that. So, and I think we have another question here as well. Okay, so Amy's asking you, so would you check changes in a version control system like GitHub?
Absolutely. You should be looking at changes, getting them into unified pull requests, and doing things like protected branches. So let's say your pre-production, your UAT sandbox, ideally that should be protected because that's the last one before production on here. So everything that comes in has to come in via a pull request, where you can have who you want to review it, multiple reviewers. So it might be one security review, one performance review, one business review. So it's all signed off. And then you can do deployments into production, again, with a protected branch. So no changes can come in without a pull request. That way you've got a chain of who's verified it, who's checked it. You can rotate those team members. You can have multiple team members for those checks. But you can set up a DevOps pipeline with protected branches to stop those changes ever reaching.
Yep, that sounds good. All right, let's move on to the next bullet. You were talking about like the double extortion. What's
Extortion. So one type of extortion is if you ever want to get access to your org, or you want to get access to your org in a really short space of time, like get access to your keys or give you a reset of your password admin, here you go. Then you really need to, that's one set of extortion that you might have from ransom. The other type is they've stolen your data as a result of getting in. So it's how do you stop that data being pumped out of your org? So things like API usage anomalies, part of Shield, to stop that coming out. Data loss prevention in case they're bulk emailing or using things like siphoning all your data out of Slack.
Yep.
Then you've got, go for it.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish.
Yeah. Then sandbox anonymization. So if you've got a full copy, a partial copy, you may have other third parties working on development. Again, that's a source of data for your customers if they're not anonymized. And then overprivileged users, which I think we've seen with a lot of the breaches where it's not been an admin user even, it's just been a lower level user that has access to a lot of data.
Yep, exactly. I think there's a couple of things I wanted to mention there. So let's talk about that double extortion. Let's talk about recent events. So I think the Alliance Insurance is a great example of that, where I forget if they were the breach was because of a data loader, the data loader attack, or if it was just a pure phishing attack. But I do know they had quite it was over, I think, was it 20 something million records, I believe, was stolen from them or accessed. But then what really made it bad was then that data later, I think it was a couple weeks later, was actually put onto Telegram. And so that's that kind of thing of like releasing the data in addition to getting it. But if, let's say, in Coke, I think was a phishing attack, I believe, as well, where they got their data. And in both those cases, if they had Shield, and maybe they did, but they weren't looking at it. But if they had Shield and event monitoring and they had the right alerts set up, they would start to see those alerts coming in because someone is starting to, like you said, pumping the data out of Salesforce. And if with that amount of data, it takes a bit of time to get out of Salesforce. So if you had those alerts, you could probably stop it when it was in the thousands, not millions, until and so I think that's kind of one of the keys here. It's back to active monitoring of your org to stop data leakage, even if a breach did happen. And it's going back to a analogy I like to use is castles. I went traveling last year all over Europe and saw these castles, and all the castles have walls. They have multiple layers of walls, and so you will get a breach. But the question is, how bad is it? So if you have another wall and another wall and another wall, well, maybe they get in and they get just a small amount of data because there's another wall in front of them, and then you lock them out before they can get to the next wall. And I think that's really the key in all of these.
Absolutely. Another one for Disney and Slack. Data loss prevention, data loss protection works very well on Slack. So you can jam it as soon as someone's starting to, you look at all the channels, download all of the data, and jam it as well. So it's not just Salesforce. You can protect the entire estate of Salesforce-like products.
Yep. And I think the key here is if you're, Salesforce is giving you the tools to be able to do these things, or in some cases you have to pay for the tools, but they're still there. But if you don't make use of them, like I know a lot of customers that bought Shield, installed it, turned it on, and that's it. And also they're not constantly, tweaking it either. They're not looking at, okay, well, how do I change it? They just set it, forget it, and move on. And then, so what's the point of paying for this, pretty expensive product that Salesforce has that's, that gives you this big visibility into your org if you don't do anything with it. And I think that's the key, is this active monitoring. If you're not actively monitoring, you won't know when someone's in your house. So Salesforce is your house.
And I'm a big believer in things like setting canary values, setting canary columns. So it may be, for instance, you've got a field that never appears on a record view, setting that up with transactional security in Shield. So if someone suddenly adds
and sorry, Speech, could you, for the people that are not as technical, could you explain a little bit, what is a canary field?
A canary field, it comes from a canary in the coal mine. So it used to be miners would have a canary in a cage in case they hit gas, which they couldn't smell, they couldn't detect. The canary would die before the miners, so they knew when the canary stopped tweeting to get out of the mine, there was gas. In security circles, what you'll do is put a record in, let's say in Salesforce, or a field in that no one should normally access. That if someone accesses it, that's the system should lock down that user. They're doing something untoward. And you'll normally make it quite a juicy thing. So it might be a field called password or passcode or something like that. Or it might be a record of a name of a celebrity.
Interesting. So it's kind of like for viruses and phishing, kind of like they have what they call like the honeypot sites, right?
Exactly.
It's trying to bait them to get to that. So then you know that they did that. Another question I have, just, I mean, this might be an extreme for people, but maybe in these days it's necessary. What do you think about what if they had about having a field on your records, and you're basically hashing the record? And then if the record changed, or that would probably be a way you could do it without Shield if you didn't have Shield, right?
Yeah, and you've got that crypto API, as I say, so you can do secured hashes and things nice and
Because I
easily.
think the problem is you've got all these companies that have Shield, and Shield would give you those that change data. But then let's say you don't have Shield, how do you know if something changed on that record, right? Or someone did access something that you don't. I mean, the viewing I think is harder, but maybe the changes. So I think that's the hard thing, is a lot of companies can't afford Shield, and what do they do?
There's cheaper tools like Processity. Processity, I can never pronounce their name right, but they offer kind of a lightweight event viewer, event monitoring, but it also does a lot more on what are people doing? Are they active in systems? Is there a training issue? That kind of thing. You can actually see an overview. But again, it's not on reads. That's on updates, on creates.
That's kind of hard, because I mean, I think the problem for everyone that isn't as aware of Shield is that Shield, it's not just a UI layer, it's basically giving the data access to the data you don't normally have in Salesforce to know what's happening. So even if someone, like, for example, if we wanted to go and build you an app that was like Shield, we couldn't, because there's certain layers we can't even get to, like knowing when someone views data in Salesforce.
Stopping a download, all of that kind of thing. You just can't be there without Shield.
Well, actually, technically, you could use our product if you want to stop a download.
Yeah.
Outside of that, the
Yeah.
view data, that's something you're stuck without Shield. So
Cool. But yeah, just canary values, so you can see whether it's a disgruntled employee, whether it's an attacker moving laterally. You can just shut it down quickly by having a few things just in plain view for someone to overreach and overextend to, that they shouldn't get to in their normal day job.
yeah, got it. That makes sense. Let's see. Oh,
And
yeah.
then just a last one, something you may not be aware of, but it's quite big news over here. The UK public sector bodies and any operators of critical national infrastructure will now be banned from paying Mint ransomware.
I think I read about that as well. And I know in the US their policy is that they don't pay ransom to extortionists, but I know it does happen here and there. So
There's talk of a bit of legislation as well to have to declare it, even if you're a company and you're now paying for it.
wow, interesting. That's crazy. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Cleanup.
Yeah, a lot of work to do. So you've got the things like resetting passwords, rotating secrets, killing sessions, clearing caches is one that often gets overlooked. Certainly, if you're on industries, there's a lot of caches, so velocity products and things. You may have corrupt data that you just need to get out once you've restored. Replacing malicious code in case it's been deployed. So making sure you've got version control, that you've actually got backups of your version control, because if they've got admin access, the chances are that if they're admin also or owner of, say, a GitHub repo, they can delete it, and preventing
What you were
re-entry.
talking about here, just to make sure everyone's on the same page with you, is you're talking about after you have an incident or a breach.
Yeah.
These are the things that you need to be doing or thinking about to clean up to ensure they're still not in your system.
Yeah, and it's the sequence of these is going to vary situation by situation. You can't set up a checklist where it's 1 to 10 for every company. There
Yeah,
are certain things you'll logically do first, but it varies.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think there's certain also I think the sequence is very important too. For example, if you killed the secrets, but then you didn't reset the password first, and then they still in there, they could have then reset that secret before you reset the password. Right.
Or
So I think
killing the sessions or any of
yeah, so I
those
think that's
noises.
where I would start first personally, and depending on how the extreme of it is resetting passwords, or there's an option in Salesforce to log all your users out immediately and expire all passwords, and so that would knock everyone out. Then killing any active sessions after there, and then also looking at your connected apps to see if there's any active things going on as well there. Then I think once I would start with ensuring that no one has active current access to my system and can't get back in. Then I start looking at other things like the secrets, like the caches, looking for malicious code, because I think the key is if they can get back in there and you've changed something, they can go back and rechange it before you know. And so the first step is make sure they can't get in currently.
Yeah. And then, they may have left malicious code that's then running once per minute to reestablish, to undo your settings or reestablish access.
Yep.
So
One other thing
you,
I remember, just a little bit of a side topic, but that I've mentioned a few times, and this is kind of the harder one, which is like malicious plugins in browsers. So that's something else to think about too, is like if you're having these plugins in your browsers and those could just piggyback off your session, don't even need a connected app, and then your users got that, then that person could be getting in there. And I think there's certain and sometimes the problem is it actually uses their own connection to get in. It's not someone trying to use their connection. It's the app running in their browser. So then IP security doesn't really help you there. So
no,
what would you
because it's
suggest
running
for
as
those
your
kinds of
session.
things?
Yeah. And with, say, Salesforce Reloaded, for instance, you can actually set that up as a connected app. Not many people do, but they give you options to do that.
Yeah. I mean, but I think some of the plugins for Chrome though, just the way they've been developed, don't actually use the connected app. It just uses your active
Yeah.
Salesforce session from another tab. So, and I think the only way that you can, mitigate those is with your IT security blacklisting or, or whitelisting only certain apps.
Yes,
Because
that makes
I think
sense.
the way that attack works, for people I've been on previous calls, is a lot of times they'll have on the App Store launch an app. It looks like it's harmless. You download it, and then they have auto update turned on, and then they push a malicious update to your or app. And so I think that just goes back to the rule of thumb: just don't download apps you don't understand or don't know and are not trusted and not properly vetted. And then if you are IT security, and making sure that you only have certain plugins whitelisted. Otherwise, you don't know what those could be doing in your environments.
And it's relatively easy for the extensions of, say, VS Code to lock down the domains that those talk to, which are very, very few. Whereas, as you say, in a web browser, you don't really want to put a per domain basis for your web browser because you're going practically anywhere.
Yep, exactly.
But that also goes back to the previous point of, maybe not run around with a sysadmin account all day long. Things, reduce it. You can use flows to add a permission set, keep it
Yep.
locked down.
And here's another thought too, and this is, of course, this is common in the Microsoft world, but less common in the Salesforce world because of cost, because the Microsoft licenses are not as much as Salesforce licenses. But I see, like, for example, when you have people logging in to, as a normal user, let's say you're an admin, but you also perform other operations, and you're not doing admin tasks every single day or all the time. You log in with a different account that is a less privileged account normally, and then only when you need to perform admin duties, then you log in with a privileged account. Obviously, this is an extreme, but and it also has cost implications because now you're having to double pay for licensing for users. But this is a a pretty much better way, because then the less you're logging in, the less opportunity someone has to take advantage of that account as well.
Absolutely.
Not to say
And
that,
if you've got
most
things like,
companies would be able to afford that, though.
yeah, security is not necessarily cheap, but it's
Yeah.
reassuring.
But I think the other way I would mention it, okay, you're paying 3,000 a year for a Salesforce license, and now you have to pay 6,000 a year per person, and you have, let me say, 5 or 10 admins, and so you're now having to pay another 10,000 a year per admin. Well, an average breach at the low end is going to cost you $9 million according to IBM. So I think 10,000 a year is cheap compared to 9 million. So
Well, it'd be nice if, say, Salesforce offered a 5-pack of these are your admin licenses.
yep,
They're your
exactly.
sysadmins. You can't interact with data on a daily, but you can access records,
Exactly. It's like
record
a
base.
setup only license or something like that.
And that would breed best practice.
Hey, maybe we can talk to Cheryl about that.
One for later, then.
If you're watching, Cheryl, there's a feature for you. All
Then
right.
we've got checking the configuration. So, what access levels have people now got? What logging? Because if you're now sending information to an attacker's Splunk that's got all the personal information in, that's no good. What endpoints? Have they redirected an endpoint to a proxy? So they're recording all the traffic and then it's going to the actual final destination? And have you got all your configurations exported and maintained elsewhere to then either compare and audit or reapply?
Yep. So let's dig into this one a little bit more. We have 12 minutes left, so I'm going to try and be quick here, but I think this is an important one. First, access. So think people could change your permission sets, your different permissions that are set there. You didn't realize it, and so now it's something that was a minimal access now has view all data. I think looking at the user access reports in Salesforce under, if you're going to click on your user by the different profiles, it shows what access they're getting from each permission set. I think that's important. Endpoints, I think what you're talking about is like remote site settings, I believe.
Yeah.
Looking at, are those endpoints going to where they should go, or do they change it to a different URL that's a fake URL that's used to capture and steal data instead?
And
Um,
you could have that in Heroku, you could have
yep.
that in MuleSoft. There's so many different places.
Yeah, of course. And then the logging, that's Shield and other things, like looking at your system setup logs. You could actually use that to see what people changed in your setup as well, going back from the time of the breach. So those are pretty good in addition to Shield, to going back. So I think this is some of the stuff that we talked about, like being actionable. Like these are some of the actual things. Probably be good idea anyway. Even, I mean, say you should be routinely looking at your setup logs in Salesforce.
Yeah. And any points, so MuleSoft again, because that's got all your APIs going back and forth, let's say between Salesforce and an ERP, they can reconfigure the logging. So it's now logging all your personal data between the two systems out to a third-party site. So you've really, there's multiple layers of logging across the estate.
Yep, exactly. And so the next one talking about is restoring backups, right?
Yeah, which is tricky because ID numbers change. If you delete a record and it's hard deleted, you then restore a record, the record ID will be different. So you
Yeah.
now
But
need
then,
to
so
think
then if
about
you're
integration.
basically connecting or using any code that hopefully you're not hard coding stuff to ID values, but there's things that could cause issues because you have different IDs for your records, right?
Yeah. And within Salesforce, you probably wouldn't, but when you're talking about integrations,
Mm-hmm.
there's a high chance you've got those record IDs in a third party
And
system.
that's exactly what I was just thinking about as well. So, like, let's say you have your account data and your account data is compromised or deleted, and you do a restore, and maybe you're using SAP, and then you have those record IDs that have been linked from SAP. Well, now you'll have to go through an exercise of trying to rematch everything up together again.
Exactly. And then you've got things like you've now brought back Salesforce back up, you've maybe restored access. How do you get the systems back in sync? Because there's going to be a time delta of data missing between one system and another that it thinks it's written to Salesforce, but that was after your backup and before your restore. So you've now got one system thinking it's got data in Salesforce and it doesn't across integrations.
Yep, exactly. So I think one thing calling out here as you're looking at it, and you're probably hopefully everyone you're getting this is what is the level, the cost of a breach, and the level of effort now required to recover from a breach. And so I think this is, of course, stopping a breach sooner than later will reduce your cost of the cleaning up a breach. So oftentimes, I think just the cleanup itself could be almost as costly as the actual breach itself, depending on what happens. Especially when you're starting to talk about fixing these integrations, these downstream systems, or if you have multiple systems that got breached, and now you're having to figure things out. It almost becomes an entire another project with the restore. I know some companies take them 6 months or longer just to recover from a breach.
And those your key people you're tying up, no opportunity, plus having to deal with everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then,
exactly.
as you say, kind of analyzing the impact. How big is it? You've got to notify, certainly with GDPR, the data protection authorities, letting affected customers know, and checking for any lateral movement between systems, which can take a long time.
Yep, exactly. And I think one thing that I've been studying a lot on lately that I think people should know about is you know, the IRL framework. That's NIST, right? Which is the Incident Response Lifecycle Framework, which is basically it's saying that that for any incident you have a life cycle that it goes through. So you start with, for example, preparation. That's preparing everything you can do just to stop a breach, even though you know you will not stop every breach. So that's like configuring your all your permissions and IP security, multi-factor authentication, shield from monitoring. But then once you have a breach, it's first step is identification. That's how fast you can identify that breach. Knowing that you can identify it, then notifying people, then containing the breach, eradicating the breach, recovering from the breach, and then that you have lesson learned at the end. How did this happen? It's like your overall review. Maybe it was training for your users. Maybe there's some other security holes you didn't do. You weren't monitoring. And I think that's the most important part of any breach is getting that last piece done. But this is a life cycle that you go through. I may have missed a step or two, but you're going through this life cycle over and over again. And it's a systematic way of dealing with a breach. So really what you're talking about here is kind of near the end of that life cycle, which is, I forget the exact name of the phase, but I think it's recovery or something like that, where basically now you're recovering from that breach, on this part versus the other part. The initial part is containment. You want to contain that breach as fast as possible. And then I think cleanup is, you have eradication and then you have cleanup. So removing the breach completely, but then finally fixing all your data and everything that was damaged from that breach. So it's kind of like I think about it like houses, and if you had like a lot damage to your house and something you have a water leak, well, the first thing you need is identify the water leak. Then you need to stop that leak, and then you figure out are there other leaks somewhere else that you need to plug, and then once that's done, I need to now clean up the damage clean up all the water first, and then I now have to fix the damage itself, and then I learn about well what caused that leak in the end.
That's it. And in your case, it's then going around telling everyone about how they can stop leaks of their own.
Yep, exactly. And write a book about it.
I
Yeah, exactly. So,
think that neatly covers the last point, Matt.
yep,
Yep.
exactly. All right, great. So, one more metric, and then we can go open up to questions. And I think there's a couple we have open still. So, Salesforce phishing attacks increased by 109% since the start of 2024, and only 57% of the data gets compromised was actually recovered after an attack. I mean, well, let's go back to, the example of Alliance Insurance I brought up earlier today, where initially they had a breach in Salesforce, and then 2 weeks later, all of their data was released on Telegram. And so that was, I believe that was a phishing attack. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but that's a perfect example of that. So. All right, questions and discussions time. So anyone can ask questions. So let me just address these first ones. So someone says, how do you deal with the trade-offs for security versus delivering on an urgent business need? What would you say is best practice for balancing the business need and security need with Shield? I'll let you take that.
Well, certainly, if you're in the middle of chaos and things, you've got to actually have money to secure your systems. So it depends. If you're in startup mode, you've got no funds coming in. Your risk reward may be higher towards getting it done. You've got to make sure it ethically sits with everyone, that it's clearly communicated to your customers, that you're not deceiving them on it. But you've actually got to have money coming in to build the security. But on the other side, once you're actually established, that risk reward flips the other way, and you need to be putting security first and foremost at every point. And if you're looking at Shield, the last bastion is that event monitoring. That's ultimately where you want to start, because anything else is an improvement on it, but at least you're getting alerted that you've been breached.
Yep. All right, and then we got one more here from Becky, yes, that said you wanted to understand about the latest guidelines from Salesforce about connected apps, installed apps, etc. And what steps do you need to take to make sure you stay within the guidelines and nothing breaks? And Becky, maybe you can go off mute just to get a little bit of context. Are you talking about with the latest changes that Salesforce is rolling out for the connected apps in regard to help secure orgs from future breaches?
Yes, that is what I'm talking about. So I'm in the process of setting up a new org, and at the moment I am the sole admin, but I do have some connected apps already in place, like I'm using form assembly and a MailChimp integration and things like that. If I've already got those set up, will they continue to work when the first thing is, will they continue to work when the new guidelines come in? And secondly, where do I need to start to make sure that I've got these apps installed or connected in the way that they're supposed to be connected, so that I'm keeping them safe for the future.
All right. Well, I think first off, Tristan, if you can post the link to the article, there's an article that was put out that tells you what are the things you should be doing for the changes coming with Salesforce. And that I think is the first question to help you. And then I can answer a little bit, then maybe Beach, if you have any other things as well. I think the first thing is the for the connected apps, if it's an installed app, you install it yourself as an admin, you don't need to worry as much. What Salesforce is more targeting with this is apps that your users themselves with not admin privileges have connected it through like a browser-based flow where they click on something, it says, hey, are you okay for this app to log in as you? They say yes, and then that app can act as them. Those are the apps that they're doing. If you have I would say an installed app that I don't know if that impacts that or not, that is a browser-based flow, that might impact it. But I think if you're it mostly if it's I think it's the user agent flow, it's okay, but if it's a device flow, that's kind of where it runs into issues.
That's it. Yeah.
And so like I said, I'm a little bit rusty. It's been a while on all those different flows, but for and maybe Beach, you can clear it a little bit from again the device flow is basically where you're logging in specifically like from your mobile phone or even your desktop, but it
Okay.
takes you through like the browser to log in. But the user agent flow, Beach, do you have can you talk about that a little bit more yourself, or?
It's a nice back and forth. You've got it can do rotation of so refresh tokens, things like that.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's what most apps I think are using is the user agent flow versus the device flow is kind of like where they're talking about where you put a code in and then it's just a really quick authentication and it's not as secure. And I think that's why Salesforce is removing that because that was open to attack.
Oh, I see. So does that mean that for big ISVs that tend to be using, they'll be using the user agent flow, and that's the thing that I can check. And then if that is the method of connection, then we're safe.
I would say first ask them, find out
Yeah.
what flow they're
Okay.
using for those changes, but also look at that post and it talks about the things that you should be doing. But
Okay.
generally, I would say generally, if it's an installed app that you install as an admin, that's probably already a good sign that you're okay. But then
Yeah.
also double check with them that you're with your vendors that there are what type of OAuth flow they are using when connecting their
Okay.
app into your
If it's not the supported one, they're going to be having a real bad time at the minute anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other
Okay.
thing I would say is looking into like data loader. So if you do have data loader installed currently, any data loader apps,
Yeah.
to be, to uninstall those personally for right now until Salesforce releases the updated changes. And then that way you can make sure that, that you don't have a rogue app installed currently. Or just make
Okay.
sure, find out if who actually published the app, if it was actually Salesforce or not. I mean, those are other things to kind of, look into. Another area you can also look into is if you look into OAuth usage, that's in your
Yeah.
you can see the different apps, whether installed or not, that are actually connecting up into your org too.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
did you say it was a relatively new org, like it's Greenfield that you're doing right now?
It's that's right. It's a relatively new org. We're supposed to be going live the week that Salesforce are talking about bringing in these new rules.
Ooh,
So
okay, so very close then. Okay.
yeah.
I was going to say, if you had a little bit more time, putting in API access control, making sure you've got an
Okay.
integration user per one. But if it's that close, that's probably way too dangerous to introduce that level of change right now.
Yeah, exactly. But I would say like having API access control on your flows, I mean, on your connected apps is definitely the safest way. So that way, if make sure that anyone connecting, but also that's something you want to test because sometimes that's not always a viable option depending on how the application works.
Okay.
Even in a small org, I'd give 6 to 8 weeks. Who knows for a larger org? I don't have the experience.
Okay.
Yeah, and also one other thing that I always bring up to people, and it's another thing you should test, but generally Salesforce will only check the IP address on initial login, like for your users. And if you go under session settings, there's a checkbox that you can check that says check for IP on every request, because a lot of times the attacks happen after the user's logged in, not during login. But that also creates overhead, and again, that could create unexpected results depending on how your different apps are operating. So that's something I'd test first in a sandbox and then, then roll it out later.
Okay. Thank you so much, both of you. That's really helpful. Some
Well,
stuff.
hope your launch goes well, Becky, to be fair.
Thank you very much. I have to say, this session has been really useful, but you've also scared me a bit, so I may be losing some sleep tonight.
Well, I think that's the idea. Hopefully it's worth it though, in the end. And that's why we're doing these, is to help people understand what they need to be thinking about.
Yeah,
So
that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
does anybody else have any questions and before we wrap up? Let me see here, Tom. I just noticed you didn't have the ability to speak in case you wanted to ask a question. Everyone else does have permission to talk. If not, we will go ahead and wrap up. Looks like Martin has a question. Martin, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about Salesforce Shield, but I've used event monitoring in a past job. But say for example, like you're trying to focus on like encryption for like a field, like, and you're trying to use like data loader for external ID. Like, is there anything that we have to be aware of in terms of making sure that like we're able to like insert or upsert any records, but keeping in mind like the best practice for using Salesforce Shield, or no?
So the event monitoring on its own, you're only kind of alerting two things. You've got data monitor for its data loader there. So if you had transaction security enabled, you could
Okay.
look at things like anomalies or certain amount which records are being updated to kind of lock it down on that side. So you can look at the API usage coming in with transaction security.
Okay.
But I don't think there's any best practice because it's a matter of what do you need for your org.
Yep, unfortunately. So will that answer your question? Does anyone else have any other questions? We are slightly over time, but happy to stay on if anyone has any other questions. Not, we can go and wrap up. All right. Well, feel free to ask while, if you guys do before we wrap things up. And this is our last slide we always show. There's some resources that we're sharing with you here versus if you want to get a copy of the book, that is that first QR code there. Second is a bunch of different blogs I've written about various different best practices you can think about in Salesforce. The last is actually a survey we're doing right now about the breach with Alliance to really understand people's take on a breach and if you would continue doing business with the brand. And we're giving the offer, if you fill out that survey, you can they were giving away $400 gift cards at random for people that fill that survey out. Just trying to gather some information, some neat data on that, and we'll be sharing the results in a later session. So all right, well, thank you very much, everyone. I believe that's it, and and looking forward to talking with all of you in the next session.
Thank you.